Okay, so this is base group 1 doing our talk about the Lenski article. So I guess, does someone want to start with kind of what they thought the article was mostly about?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, feel free, Gina, to jump in.
Yeah.
I think just referring to the title, is what are the challenges and possibilities of RTI for adolescent literacy.
Mm-hmm.
And to summarize a couple main points, secondary is different looking than where RTI was originally intended or contextualized.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some opportunities and some challenges, and some of those challenges are people's existing attitudes and beliefs about literacy and
Mm-hmm.
their role in the classroom as content area specialists,
Mm-hmm.
and also the schedule of a secondary classroom was another point that I highlighted,
Mm-hmm.
and then the opportunities to enhance your curriculum through a literacy lens as a potential asset to this view of RTI. But in a secondary context, it takes all of your content area specialists working
Mm-hmm.
together and seeing a shared vision of literacy and practices that can stretch across content areas, but through the lens of disciplinary literacy.
That sounds good to me. Gina, anything you want to add on to that?
Yeah, no, I think Katie kind of hit on it all. And
Yeah.
what I highlighted too is just how students are not leaving school with very strong ability to read. That
Mm-hmm.
resonated with me as well. And
Mm-hmm.
then the other thing reading is not taught after sixth grade.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was kind of interesting, and I would guess that is probably true. And as an elementary teacher, when you teach reading all the time, you just think that it continues and continues, and there's always still things to learn.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that resonated very well.
Yeah, definitely. I would say even I don't know, it's around, most often I find around third or fourth grade, right? That switch even kind of starts to happen, where it's not the same as middle school, but even those later grades have similar shifting to that reading to learn. So yeah, cool. I don't think I have anything to add to that. So let's see. Did anyone focus in on the authors? I personally did not. So
I didn't address that one.
That's fine.
I did not even.
All right. So honestly, I kind of had my own personal reactions. That was really where I kind of focused. And one thing that I was really curious about, I'm going to try to find the page number, but it was where she suggested that the teachers, content and middle school teachers, should have a say in who should be identified for Tier 2 supports, right? Because that was a separate, I think the author is really separating out Tier 2 from Tier 1, and that Tier 2 is still in need, but she was really focusing on Tier 1 instruction here and how students are going to need that support. I would just hesitate I am curious what that would look like, I guess, because I would want to have some sort of qualifier or basically we already over-identify certain populations of students, and if we leave that open to just whoever is struggling, I think that could have the potential to actually cause a bit of harm.
Uh-huh.
Not saying that teachers are usually wrong in identifying students who need support, but I think that's a challenge inherent kind of in that claim.
Uh-huh. Right.
So that was a piece that I kind of looked at and went, well, I agree. It was on 280. That's where it was, where it's just teachers can list the names of students who teachers suspect are having difficulty reading grade-appropriate texts. So on that level, I don't think that's a challenge. They can absolutely say, I think this kiddo's having a hard time, but then what are the follow-ups? What are the action steps that are put into place?
Yeah,
And
I think that, go ahead.
Stacy too is, after doing that case study Don as well,
Mm-hmm.
if they're not motivated with a certain topic,
Mm-hmm.
they're not going to read it. Might appear to be that struggling student,
Right.
whereas they might be a student who gets into a different academic area and does very, very well.
Right.
So it's hard. One teacher will see a difficult area, but another teacher will say, what are you talking about? He's doing very well.
Right. And that's that distinction between the Tier 1 and Tier 2, right? Because then it may just be this kiddo is not super engaged with science or whatever, pick your subject area, and they're going to need specific science support. Because one thing that I see all the time is going to schools and providing supports. Gina, you were at the Tier 2 workshop on Friday where it very often becomes this kid is having a problem reading and I can't help, so it's no longer my job to provide those additional supports, right? Because there's that danger too.
Yeah, that's what I see more of. I understand like the struggle with asking continuity teachers to weigh in on an area of expertise that they might not have a solid grasp on, but I would rather see continuity teachers like engaging in that process than not. So that's the paradigm shift that we really struggled with where I work is getting every continuity to see themselves as an instructor of literacy. And I think I was going back to my notes here is I thought there was a little tension in the text about whether or not continuity teachers, if it's helpful to ask them to teach foundational literacy skills. And it said, I kind of thought that it said yes and no. There was more of an emphasis that it's more important to teach through the lens of the discipline and the discourse modes of that practice, of the community of practice. But at the same time, I thought it said, yes, everybody needs to recognize and be modeling the practices. So I don't know what you all thought about that.
That was something I noticed too, like right off the bat on the first page where she pulled out that quote, the Rissman, Miller, and Torgensen quote. It was it's clear that content area teachers cannot be expected to teach struggling readers, essentially, like they can't do the foundations. They're going to have to focus in the content areas. But like my note is literally like, who is expected to do this work though? Right. Because while that's not why everyone struggles, there are going to be students who need that support. And how are you going to have the structures and systems in place to make sure those students who need that explicit skill instruction are getting it?
Exactly.
Right. You know, a couple of years ago, I taught 6th grade, and I think as a 6th grade teacher, I thought kids coming into my classroom already know how to read, but yet I still need to teach reading too. And so as a 6th grade teacher, you're kind of still along the same lines as these adolescent readers as well. So it's not just junior high and senior high, but it probably even can go down even to the 5th and 6th grade where this is information as well.
Definitely.
I think too of any grade where you're getting newcomers in, and so they might not be considered struggling readers, or they might not fit that whatever box you're thinking of as struggling, but you're still going to be teaching some basics, language basics. I would hope in any content area. That's not always the case.
Yeah,
but I hope so.
Yeah, definitely. I can bring up another point if you guys want. I don't want to dominate the conversation. Let's see. Oh, there was one I had a pretty strong reaction to. I think it's down on 280 again. Sorry, I'm just trying to find it and capturing it for our video. Let's see. Oh, it was interesting, the discussion of like, what is a screener and what is the purpose of a screener? It was, so like underneath assess literacy progress, it talks about how like these RTI frameworks typically have a screening measure to help determine that students have a need. And the tests are not appropriate because they may be able to tell educators who struggles, but not why. And that to me, like, that grated on me completely, where I was like, well, that's not the purpose of a screener, though. Like, that's why it's a screener. It's meant to take a minute per student, and it'd be a quick, like, yes, this kiddo's doing okay, or no, this kiddo's not doing okay. You need to dig deeper. I think that there's been, in some schools, in my experience, a shift away from using screeners just because they don't give you all of the answers you need, when really they're just kind of this important starting place. So that was something where I read that and I just went, that's exactly the kind of stuff that really bugs me about screeners. They do have a place typically.
Right, I agree with you on that.
But you need to know how they're meant to be used.
There was something else on page, if you wouldn't mind looking at page 77, where it says, it's under the section called What is RTI? And it's in the second full paragraph towards the end. And sentence says, the students who have shown reading growth after Tier 2 intervention are eligible for Tier 3. Isn't that, I mean, if they have not had reading growth?
Yeah, that one I highlighted too, and I'm pretty sure you're exactly right. I think that's how it was meant.
Did they leave out an important word?
Yeah.
Not intended?
Yes. That was one I also, I have a note. I think the author means who have not shown reading growth are eligible for tier 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Something was misprinted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. But then looking at, it is interesting about like what is tier 2 versus tier 3, because in some schools, tier 3 just equals special education. For some people, special ed is this whole separate thing. I don't know. It's just interesting when in research they're talking about the different tiers, and because there aren't rules or regulations around what defines each tier, that's always interesting to see how researchers address it.
There was also one summarizing statement that I could not have agreed with more. Maybe somebody should fill in, but
Sure.
we will not find the flexibility and the preventative assets of RTI if we don't have all our content teachers working together. And it's just that simple. I mean, simply stated, we need everybody to do it.
Yeah, that's been a huge, I mean, some students will still need that tier 2 support, but that tier 2 support is usually at most 30 minutes a day, right? So if the core is weak, or if they need additional support in specific content areas, tier 2 is not going to fix that.
Right, exactly.
Are there schools where tier 3 is the special ed, but are there schools where tier 3 is not special ed students?
Yep.
Not that?
Yep. I can speak only to elementary, but anecdotally, yes, I've been out at schools where they say tier 3 means special ed, or tier 3 means this intervention instead of the tier 2 intervention. And special ed's over here, we call it tier 4, or it's this column over here, not even on top of the triangle. That's a separate. So people have interpreted it very differently.
I mean, that's the way it is at our school too, where tier 3 are considered those special education kids. But well, I'd be interested what tier 3 non-special ed would look like.
Yep. I mean, I've seen that it's pretty informal. So like we don't like that to happen where we have gen ed kids being pulled out of their core ELA class or whatever. But if they are, it should be for a really temporary time. And that there should be like an immediate plan to get them back in core as soon as possible. But I think there's like a lot of oversight, a lack of oversight in there as kids that have been pulled out of core for a really long time, even without an IEP or without any consideration in special ed. And that tension, we don't want to over-identify or have too many students in special ed, so we'll just have them in this middle place where they're not identified and they're not also even receiving core instruction. So.
Yeah, man, the system struggles at middle school and high school are so different from elementary. I mean, we've been, as an organization, doing a lot of reading around middle school because our group is trying to expand into middle school and piloting some like RTI MTSS systems. And there needs to be a lot more research as far as just basics of how this can look and is it beneficial or what changes need to be made.
Right. Well, then to add on to that is that students read very little in secondary school. Like that's totally true from my experience. There's very little reading or writing in 8 hours from the beginning to the end of the day. So I don't see that as a really complicated fix, but it becomes one when I don't know what really the barrier is, but attitudes or resources or they're not reading. Like we're not asking students to read or write.
And then layering on top of that you need to be able to change the difficulty of the text for all sorts of students. And that's another layer of, teacher work. That was one of the assignments we had to do was take a text and rewrite it at a simpler level so that people could access it. And it's a lot of work to try to meet all those students' needs. But yeah, you got to start with just straight out reading and then we can build from there.
Right.
Let's see here. I pulled out an excerpt from page 279, the second column. There are many reasons having opportunities to read is important. Among them, that reading can increase prior knowledge, which can increase comprehension. Teachers, however, are wary of asking students to read text because so many of their students are unable to read at grade level. So I think that ties right into what we were talking about. And that actually reminded me of the math